Here are the updated COVID-19 numbers for the United States. We have confirmed 4.89 million cases, up by 53,206 from yesterday. Was not able to find the recovered numbers for today. Unfortunately, 160,000 people have died. That's up by 1,248 from yesterday. New York Attorney General seeks to dissolve NRA in suit accusing gun rights group of wide-ranging fraud and self-dealing. According to a lawsuit filed yesterday by the New York Attorney General, the chief executive of the National Rifle Association and several top lieutenants engaged in a decades-long pattern of fraud to raid the coffers of the powerful gun rights group for personal gain, draining $64 million from the group in just 3 years. Also, according to a State Department report released on Wednesday, Russia continues to use a network of proxy websites to spread pro-Kremlin disinformation and propaganda in the United States and other parts of the West. This is according to the Washington Post. The report is one of the most detailed explanations yet from the Trump administration on how Russia disseminates information, but it largely avoids discussing how Moscow is trying to influence the current campaign. Again? Come on. Okay, well, what does all this mean? Well, it's Friday, so we're going to open the show the way we always do. He's a frequent collaborator with all major news outlets and author of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, Caleb Maupin. Caleb, welcome back.
Glad to be here as always.
So let's start with the NRA and the suit by the New York Attorney General and basically charging the leadership with fraud and self-dealing. And Attorney General Karl Racine in Washington, D.C., he announced yesterday that his office is filing a separate suit against the NRA Foundation, which is based in Washington, saying that they violated their charter and underhandedly dealing with the parent organization in New York. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, I'm certainly no fan of the National Rifle Association. The group doesn't really just promote, firearm ownership and the Second Amendment. If you look at their material, it's very ideological. The message is that, communism is coming to raise your taxes and take your guns away. So we've all got to rally around the flag and support police officers against protesters. And it's almost kind of a right-wing ideological grouping that puts out a very specific narrative tied in with the Republican Party. People point out that it is tied not just to those who sell weapons for individual purchase, but also those who sell weapons to the military. It's tied to the military-industrial complex and such. That said, I mean, this so obviously seems to be a political ploy. I mean, this is about a culture war, essentially. This is the New York State Attorney General, New York City, attempting to wage an effort against an organization that is very key in rallying red states to support the Republican Party. We see Donald Trump tweeting out that the Democrats are going to take all your guns away. They're already getting rid of the police, and then they're going to take your guns away. Very much, we see liberal circles arguing that Republicans are responsible for the mass shootings because guns are available to these mass shooters. So this is very much a politicized culture war move designed to, kind of emphasize the polarization in the country when it comes to issues like gun rights, abortion, et cetera. And I don't find it to be particularly positive, and not necessarily in the Democrats' interest either. There is all kinds of speculation about the role of the National Rifle Association in Republican politics. And, they seem to be aligned with Trump, but there seems to be some underlying tensions there. So I see this as a highly politicized move, and I don't really think it's going to go very far, honestly. But if this was simply a matter of fraud on the part of the leaders of the NRA, if they were simply being charged with the fact that they somehow engaged in fraud and took the organization's funds, then at that point, why would the goal be to dismantle the organization? Would they not just prosecute those individuals for fraud and have others move up to take their place?
Yeah, I tend to be. I think my views align with you 100%. I also, have a little bit of history here. It was 2 years ago, and again, in the interest of transparency, I am on the National Board of Directors for the American Civil Liberties Union. So, 2 years ago, the ACLU, there was a bit of a dust up between the National ACLU and the New York City affiliate. For this reason, the New York State's Attorney General's office was going after the NRA, saying that they were going to try to stop them from being able to do bank transactions in New York, and the ACLU National opposed that and wrote an amicus brief, a friend of the court letter opposing that, saying basically, okay, we're not thrilled with the NRA, but what you're doing is based on political views, and we can't have that happen. And so we oppose it. So now it appears that it's a continuation of attack on the NRA. Don't like the NRA, don't agree with them. However, I also think this. To me, this is like the caravans, the fake caravans the other year, just before the election, just for the midterms and before the election, et cetera. And that is, it benefits Trump, it benefits the conservatives to have one of their organizations where they can point it out and say, look at this, the liberals are attacking us, they're going to take your guns. To me, it's almost like they sat around and thought, what can we do to help Trump and the conservatives from a political perspective? I think it is the most, counterproductive thing that they could have possibly done. And when you add in that it's also happening in D.C., it appears like, so when the conservatives say there's this vast left-wing conspiracy to take us out, boom, there's the evidence. They motivate their people to the polls.
Well, I'll also add that Letitia James, she's a rising star in New York City politics. And this is something that in New York City and in New York state politics will get her a huge amount of applause. She went after the NRA. She got tough on this right-wing organization that makes parents afraid to send their kids to school. That's how it's going to play, in Manhattan. That's how it's going to play in Brooklyn. And it's going to get her lots of applause. And at the end of the day, though, I don't see it really going very far. And I feel like it could help Trump in the long term. That said, at the same time, it is increasingly disturbing to see the attorney generals and the prosecution of crime in the United States become politicized. And that's happening on both sides of the aisle. We're seeing that where, prosecutors' job is to enforce the law. If someone breaks the law, regardless of their political affiliation, they're supposed to prosecute them and that's how it's supposed to go. But increasingly, we have promises from Republicans to go after the Muslim community, to go after Antifa. We have promises from Democrats to go after the NRA, to go after conservatives, to go after certain corporations, and that this is breaking from that rule of law mindset that is supposed to dominate the departments of justice in states and federal governments. And it's somewhat disturbing to watch. We remember Donald Trump when he announced that he was going to put Hillary Clinton in jail, and that was like, lock her up, became a rallying cry of his campaign. Well, I'm no fan of Hillary Clinton, and I mean, she's certainly committed a great amount of malfeasance. And you'll notice that promise kind of slipped out of his mind the second he got elected. I haven't seen him take any moves against the Clintons. But regardless, that's not appropriate, right? That's not how the Justice Department works. You don't sick the Justice Department on your political opponents. That's not how the rule of law is supposed to be conducted.
According to a State Department report that was released on Wednesday, Russia continues to use a network of proxy websites to spread pro-Kremlin disinformation and propaganda in the United States and other parts of the West. One of the problems that I see with the report is, once again, there does not seem to be any evidence to support the claim. Caleb, I just don't get it. First, what's more challenging to a democracy? An ecosystem of websites that nobody's ever heard about, or backing a military coup such as the Bay of Piglets that the U.S. backed in Venezuela? And second, has any evidence been presented to the American people that the people who are posting on these sites are actually foreign agents or operatives of a foreign government? I keep hearing this banter, but I'm not seeing any evidence. Caleb Maupin, help me out.
Well, I read the report, and the title of the report, right? The ecosystem of, or what is it? The pillars of Russia's disinformation and propaganda ecosystem. It sounds like you're about to, expose something really nefarious. Like you're going to have this smoking gun of a vast conspiracy, and oh my God! And you read the report; it's a list of websites. And all it basically says about these websites is, well, we can't prove that they necessarily are directed by Russian intelligence, but they put out stories and have an editorial perspective that seems to line up with Russia's goals. So therefore, you shouldn't believe anything ever published on any of these websites because of some things. And it's like it profiles these websites. I mean, it's just profiles of websites. Now, one of the websites targeted is the Center for Global Research in Canada, Michael Chusodovsky. Well, they've been around for a long time. They are not from Russia. They are from Canada. They publish news from all kinds of different perspectives, and then they bait them hilariously for saying things about COVID that were said by the president of the United States. I mean, it's like, oh, they said things about COVID. They said it might be fake. They said it might not be as serious. Trump said that. They say that COVID might have been invented in a laboratory. Pompeo said that about, saying it could have been invented in China. I mean, the whole thing is pretty outrageous. They go after New Eastern Outlook, an online magazine associated with the Russian Academy of Sciences, which is an academic institution in Russia. And I mean, you go through it and it's just like, this website's no good. This website's no good. And, the fact that these websites exist is something that should make you very, very angry. I noticed that the Embassy of Russia responded to the report on Facebook. And they pointed out that right now there are negotiations going on for cooperation between Russian intelligence and American intelligence when it comes to issues like counterterrorism, and that they feel this report was put out to justify stopping that cooperation. This is essentially their excuse for not working with Russia against terrorism. Now, think about that, right? That, Russia, they're dealing with, al-Qaeda groups and, Chechen separatists and all of that, and Syria and ISIS and all of that. But we can't cooperate with Russia to stop terror attacks because of some websites. That's essentially what they would have you believe. That's something that should fill you with outrage. But you want to get even crazier. There are some wildly inaccurate information reports in the document. For example, it claims that the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia is a voice of the Russian state. Well, Google it. The Liberal Democratic Party is an opposition party. They are highly critical of Putin. They are the right-wing opposition. They want Islam to be outlawed. They're like the far-right party in Russia that runs against Putin in the election. They claims that a chain of radio stations in Russia that is private and is very highly critical of the government is somehow state propaganda. And icing on the cake, it claims that a Marxist group in the United States known as the Workers' World Party, it claims that the Workers' World Party was set up by the KGB, which is hilarious because if you know anything about the history of the Workers' World Party, they were formed because they were supporting Mao against the Soviet Union. So, I mean, they were supporting Mao against Khrushchev. In fact, for the whole first 10 years of their existence, they were almost exclusively taking pro-Chinese positions. So how in the world could they have been set up by the KGB? I mean, that's a pretty extreme allegation to make against a small Marxist group in the United States. So you look at the report, you just have to wonder, was it really worth them putting it out? But there's a call for the section of the U.S. State Department, the Global Engagement Center that put out the report. They want $138 million added to their budget right now to counter these kinds of websites. $138 million to counter websites. That's what they want. So think about that. At a time where Americans are losing their jobs, evictions, bridges are not secure, water's not being purified, that unemployment enhancement is on the chopping block, and we want $138 million to counter some websites that, well, we can't really prove that they're tied to Russia, but they put out a pro-Russia message or a message that's in line with what Russia might want people to hear, so we got to counter them. This is something that should really boggle the minds of average Americans and really force them to ask where the priorities of their government are.
Well, I do think that article should be discussed. Whenever you're discussing the issue of online propaganda and influence, but just not in the context that they're presenting themselves. The New York Times put out another article on the 24th of July. U.S. warns Russia, China, and Iran are trying to interfere in the election. Democrats say it's far worse. I guess the Democrats are going to complain that they left out Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, and maybe North Korea. It's a joke anymore. To me, what all we're looking at, and I'm sure you remember this Washington Post article, Prop or Not. We're looking at the latest version of Prop or Not. It's money laundering to some extent, where these NGOs, they're getting funding. The various, now we've got government organizations that are doing what's in effect, based on what you're saying, a public relations campaign to get more money. And the New York Times simply, they're getting money and they're continuing to feed catnip to the resistance. Caleb.
Indeed, the evidence against all these news outlets that were on the Prop or Not list, that were on the, the recent report from the State Department, the evidence against them is what they say. If you say certain things, you are guilty of being an asset of foreign intelligence. It's not based on any evidence that they have. It's not based on any connection they can prove. It's if you say certain things that we determine to be part of the quote-unquote pro-Russian narrative, you are therefore guilty, right? I mean, this is beyond guilt by association. This is if you use certain phrases, if you publish articles making certain points, even if those points happen to be true and happen to be correct, you're guilty of being an asset of the foreign, vast Russian plot to discredit the United States and to, challenge the hegemony of U.S. narratives in international media. I mean, it's really totalitarian.
You got to add this, Caleb, even if those points are true, and even if those points are published in mainstream American newspapers, even if it's published in the New York Times, and you publish it tomorrow in one of the, so-called Russian or Iranian, whatever newspapers, you're, quote, amplifying it. So if you tell the truth and they told it, or if you cover something that the mainstream media is already covering it, now they've got a new term. You're amplifying things. Caleb.
Indeed. I mean, are you starting to think critically of the government? Are you starting to think that U.S. foreign policy might be bad? Well, don't do that. That's what the Russians want. They're in your brain, obey. Don't fall for the Russian plot. I mean, this is like from the 1950s. And you have to think, like, do they really think that the American people are going to fall for this? I mean, especially at a time when dissent is through the roof. I mean, conspiracy theories and dissident views in the United States are very popular, and that's not because of Russia. And at a time when people are very angry at the status quo, is this really the time to be giving people just a so blatantly obvious, barely concealed at all, don't think critically message? I mean, it almost just exposes them in a way. I mean, it almost encourages people to check out these websites and encourages people to dissent.
Unfortunately, we only have about a minute and a half left to discuss China threatening countermeasures as Taiwan prepares for U.S. visit. HHS Secretary Alex Azar is on his way to Taiwan. I have no idea why Taiwan would want to talk to the United States about public health, but your thoughts, Caleb Maupin.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Taiwan has done a very good job opposing the pandemic and restricting it, and they have had barely anything near the outbreak that we've had in the United States. So maybe the head of the USA is going to learn from Taiwan. But that said, the understanding that Taiwan is part of China, that there are not two Chinas, there is one China. The recognition of the People's Republic of China and pulling away recognition from the KMT, Republic of China based on Taiwan, that was pretty key. Henry Kissinger set that up, and that was pretty key in China opening trade with the United States, and it was pretty key in a lot of the events that led to the end of the Cold War. So for the United States to start moving in the direction of looking like they're going to start recognizing the government on Taiwan, or advocating some separation of Taiwan from China, that is a move that is very much going to cause a lot of outrage on the mainland. And it fits in with a whole pattern of escalation, whether it's the attacks on TikTok, whether it's the trade war. It fits into a whole pattern of dangerous polarization in Asia pushed by the Trump administration.
Caleb Maupin, as always, well done, sir. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful weekend. We look forward to having you back.
Sure thing. Always a pleasure.
You're listening to The Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, Dr. Wilmer Leon, joined here by my trusted co-host, Garland Nixon. There is more on the other side. Stay tuned.